we know very clearly that we either work very fast into especially influencing new generations for a change, a positive change, or we are going to have very terrifying crisis in the future.
We have so much to learn and we have so many challenges that we're dealing with, and then it's amazing how many people come to learn from the experience of Costa Rica. Like just on Saturday I was walking around with a woman from Finland who's trying to learn from the example of Monteverde on how to do some things in Helsinki, in a city, because they're trying to create urban forests. So they're trying to see how you can connect community, conservation, and the different elements that participate in this. And yeah, but then we see our challenges and we're like, really? We're some of the ones who are doing best. And when we see like Costa Rica coming out in the news and we're like, really? Like, we have so much to do. And sometimes it's like, and we're such a small country, right? The guides are the ones who have direct contact with the tourists. They're the ones who are the teachers here. So you start by educating the teachers.
These trees right here, over in this is now okay. And so howler monkeys would be the one place you'd see them crossing, so they didn't like going down to the ground. But over the years, we're seeing how the trees have grown on either side, and the forest has reconnected. Starting a community on the Caribbean side, and so how that would affect the cloud forest and the rainforest concerned them, and they started a project teaching their students about the need to raise funds to buy up rainforest, and they spoke with the Swedish government and got a matching fund promise. Whatever these students could raise, in money, the government would give a matching amount. Well, this started a campaign. It went from school to school. It's linked to climate change. What actually was actually affecting these amphibians, the fungus in their skin, and the presence of the fungus could be other reasons, not just the climate, for arriving to this elevation. And what I would suggest is that the climate, especially dry El Nino of '87, created conditions favorable for it. So once it was here, it could grow and spread. But it was certainly not the only, climate was not the only thing that caused the disappearance and the declines of amphibians at the end of the 80s. So it's a combination of factors.
Where do the bellbirds migrate from?
So it depends on where you talk about. We could talk about it as a point of starting is where they nest, where they breed, and that's here in the cloud forest. But after breeding, they will move down the Pacific slope into where you're staying in Calandria, and the Los Llanos is one of the key areas for a lot of the juveniles. And then ending usually September. So we had some as late as early October last year. Usually September, then then they leave completely. And those of Monteverde seem to go in two different directions. Some go to the north, to the Caribbean, and all the way up into the Caribbean part of Nicaragua. And then come down around onto where they should be right now, the peninsula around the Gulf of Nicoya, peninsula of Nicoya on the Pacific slope. But there's another population that goes south. And they go south to the Talamanca Mountains. And one of the curiosities was listening to them, because those from Panama have a different call, a dialect. And we'd hear that there were these two different calls going on up here in Monteverde. So that's when we suddenly realized that we have two different groups of birds. But one of the things that you've been learning about with all this with language is that we've found young that were bilingual, that were actually doing both calls. And this is a group of birds that supposedly have their calls genetically programmed. And so it was clear that, at least in the case of the bellbird, these young must be listening, learning from what they're hearing around. And generally as they become adults, then they will opt for one of the two. But I've seen adult, what to me look like adult bellbirds and are bilingual. They're going back and forth with two different dialect calls. But I listened to recordings of bellbirds in Nicaragua and in Honduras, which is as far north, and they sound very different from those here in Monteverde, or those that are in Panama. So it's a very curious bird that, even though they look exactly the same, they can sound dramatically different in different regions.
Creating like economic opportunities that are focused on an economic thrive and not economic growth, and that promote well-being in the community, health, human interaction, right, community.
I took an art class, and as a result of the art class, I discovered I was an artist, and gradually became less interested in my cows and more interested in spreading paint, and so that led to many adventures.
If you don't want to promote an economy based on monoculture, you need to create an economy based on collaboration, because nobody will be able to sustain economically their farm through having multiple crops, right? Because it's harder, it's more complicated, and that makes it a need to collaborate together as a community.
By 1980, by far, dairy was the main economic activity in the area. Second was coffee production, and gradually the development of tourism, the tourism industry. Tourism industry started happening in Monteverde partly due to the fact that biologists, mostly from the United States, had done research work in the area in the 70s and early 80s, And this research permitted or facilitated getting important information about the richness of the biodiversity of this area. Important articles were written about Monteverde as a very important place in biodiversity, and that gradually started attracting naturalists or ecotourism, and especially, let's say, in the 80s and 90s, most of the people visiting the Monteverde area were people interested in the biodiversity of the zone, and that's why we called it the ecotourism phase in the history of this zone. Later on, and talking about let's say the 2000s, around the 2000s, then a different type of tourism starts coming, and that's adventure tourism. So adventure tourism gains force or gains volume, let's say. And another movement is the visitation to the area of educational tourism, like you guys. Life Monteverde program. That's the program that works with the students, but it's also the program that has to do with environment and how to produce with protecting the environment. So Life program is a very important part of this farm. So what we would like for a student to go out of the farm with is those things related to environment, related to community work, related to looking for ways to diminish the impact of climate change, for example. And especially Guillermo. Guillermo is one of the founders, my brother, one of the founders of Life in Barzan. He has been an environmental educator for 30 or 35 years.
First, in most of the cases, we think that the papaya won't provide you anything except when it is mature. But at the end, there is no waste from the papaya fruit. No. The same with all the manure. For most of our cultures, manure is ugly, manure is smelly, manure is a waste. In nature, manure is not a waste. It's part of nature. So here is one of the small sections we do for composting. The thing is that if you don't do this, you are losing the opportunity to get all these nutrients, and if you don't do properly, this also sends methane up to the atmosphere.
So this doesn't produce methane?
Very little in the way it's done. Yeah.
If you did not do the composting, what would happen to the waste?
In some farms they just accumulate, they dump. In some farms they even, not much now, but in the past they just wash out to the streams, the river, in the old times. In some cases, I remember maybe 40 years ago, when we had the cows, we went to the fields, we had the rubber butts. We had the idea of that the manure was good for the pasture. So my dad sent us, I say, kicking the manure on the pastures. Kicking the manure just to spray. Yeah. because if you leave them concentrated, they don't really improve the soil. And in large scale, in countries like Netherlands today, there are very strict laws about this, because too many cows, too many pigs in Netherlands, that they cannot leave this on the ground, because this goes to the water and then pollutes all the water in the country. Water is becoming an issue in the future, because the moment the springs are going down, tourists are coming up, and we have to supply water not only to the 5,000 people living in Monteverde, but we have to provide water for the 200,000 vehicles a year coming here.
The infrastructure of the community was not designed for 500,000 tourists. So the result is that we are not living in a sustainable way. If you go out and you can look out the window and there's 30 or 40 cars out there. Well, and this and there's no plan, or if this continues this way, we continue to add to the carbon in the air, and on and on and on, and so in so many ways, if we are not living in the future of the way we'll have to live in the future if we're going to have a sustainable world, and we need to be planning for that. But there doesn't seem to be very much consciousness of the importance of planning for our future in a sustainable way.
Anything out of balance will have its negative effects. So yeah, negative effects of tourism is, for example, tourism taking over all the activities. So having less and less spaces for community gatherings, like focused on the community needs, which is the part of participation that's really important as well. Or in certain areas it means a wider gap between socioeconomic groups, right? The rich become maybe richer, the poor become poorer. Now in Monteverde we have a new challenge. We're starting to see more multinational organizations, so that's going to be more complex to get involvement, to make decision making, to engage people of the community, right? Because the main decision makers are not even here in Monteverde, but we have to take advantage of the ones that are here. And it has created an alternative. It has created an income also for people to be able to participate, on the other hand, right? If they're not working all the time, some of these people can actually take time to participate. So it's like in one way, no, but in the other way, yes, right? So it's always hard with that. And even like for community activities, we can say, okay, there's less community activities because of tourism, or less things focused on the community. But at the same time, tourism has allowed us to have some things here that we wouldn't have had without tourism, like concerts, or people speaking about international issues. They come because they're tourists in the area, and we take advantage of them as a resource. But then of course the use of natural resources in tourism, I'm making like a mess here, but yeah, like the overproduction of garbage or overuse of water, transportation is a big carbon emitter. I mean, Costa Rica can come and become carbon neutral. I don't know if we cannot account for all the carbon that we're producing with the travelers coming in. Industry right now, all this thing with circular economy is key. Instead of throwing out trash, we have to see our trash as a resource. and understand how the different cycles work. It's interesting how usually when I talk to a group and I say, okay, what should we do when we have problems? Like if we want to reforest, where do we take the economy? Where do we get our food? Usually at least one student will say, ship it somewhere else. And there's this lack of understanding that we work as a planet, we work as a whole. I would like tourism to benefit a wider area than just Monteverde. And by that, I don't mean create more tourism in other areas, because that's what usually people think of. It's more that the funds that come in through tourism to Monteverde are distributed more in other areas of the corridor, for example, by buying produce from the corridor. Integrating more the economical part with the conservation efforts, so that people understand that with good conservation practices, they can actually improve the production of their land.
¿Qué te digo? Diciembre, enero, febrero y marzo son como los meses en los que nos visitan más turismo. Y ya julio, agosto, septiembre y octubre es como un poco más bajo. Se puede decir que los meses que hay más turismo, vendemos más, por supuesto. Y los meses en donde hay menos turismo son meses más difíciles. Es muy bonito conocer a personas nuevas y personas que vienen de otro país a conocer Costa Rica. En los 7 meses que tengo de trabajar acá, no he tenido una mala experiencia con ningún turista.
You know, my experience in India and all that led me to more to the tropics, and well, everything Monteverde finally kept coming up over and over again, and I came in, and when the first week I was here, there was being 1970, I immediately saw it was my cup of tea, and here I am. The big change, of course, is tourism, but there's probably many downsides, but the upside is it's become far more diverse and culturally interesting, and it's an opportunity for us to Monteverde to share what we've done and help people be connected to on all these tours people take of nature. Those are very important, and it's something that we can be very positive. So in general, I'm a happy Monteverdean.
Everything has good and bad. Tourism has meant an income for the community and for conservation efforts that without that we wouldn't be able to sustain them. It's been an opportunity to learn from the people who visit us. It's been an opportunity for us to teach from our efforts as well. And that's also empowering as a community. When we see people talking good about us elsewhere, it makes us very proud. Monteverde is a very proud community.
If you go to the lowlands, right, where it's completely different, how do you convince the farmers that it's important? They probably don't care about the forest as much as we do. How do you do it?
Talking about the water supply.
Yeah, that's super important. Those guys in the lowlands really care about water because it's a huge problem. I mean, they're having problems with water. Also, they're having problems with forest fires, you know, And if you help them to bring the forest back, or get more trees or something, they're going to be interested in protect. Some of them, not all of them, sadly. But yeah, that's part of my job, and I always ask, hey, do you have any ideas that could be helpful for me? But yeah, that's part of the process, and it's beautiful, and I don't know, it's part of being in this magical biological corridor.
After a group of students have been here in the farm 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, the best moment is when at the end we get together and have sort of closing discussion, and we hear comments from the people that we know it's things that were created in recent hours or in recent days. And those things, we hope some of those things will stay for months, for years, for all the life of this young person, and hopefully will permeate to other people too.
What are some practical strategies that you think other communities in other parts of the world can practice to diminish the effects of climate change?
I think the long-term way, but the most efficient way, or the most successful way, is working with the young people, working with the elementary schools and high schools. And I think one of the great things that were done in this area 30 years ago was to have education in relation to nature and to sustainable practices and recycling in schools. And now most of these people are gradually taking responsibilities in the community.
Even though I say, okay, our door is open, come in, that's not enough. We have to engage the community. One of the coolest things that I think when you say, okay, what issues does the community have and what people identify as issues, is that they want more participation. And that is something very positive. And that's something that they feel as a challenge, is to see how people get to participate and want to participate, but people being aware that it's through community that we can create change is a very good thing.